Welcome to Real Talk with Reginald D. I'm your host, Reginald D. On today's episode, I have Gabe Dough. Gabe is the creator of Good Bru. After years of struggling with chronic reflux and fatigue, Gabe discovered firsthand how restoring your gut balance can transform your body and your mind. So, Gabe, welcome to the show.
Hey, it's a pleasure to be on here, Reginald, and I hope we'll have a great conversation. I'm sure we will, about entrepreneurship, gut health, wherever it takes us.
That's it. So, Gabe, your journey started with your own health struggles. Can you take us back to the moment when you realized that healing your gut could transform not just your body, but also your mind and energy?
Yeah, it's an interesting story because really my interest in the gut microbiome really happened before I had my issues with acid reflux, which got very severe, or at least at the time it was so minor. But I was a graduate student, and I was working in Office of Technology Transfer at East Carolina University. And we had a conversation about some research that was going on with multiple sclerosis. And one of the things that was being talked about at this time, which was on the fringe, was that the gut microbiome played a role in these autoimmune diseases like multiple sclerosis. So that stuck with me. That conversation stuck with me. And I was working on some other things in the food industry and the seafood industry. And anyhow, to make a long story short, I was at a conference and I noticed that a company was culturing this strain of probiotic that was a spore-forming probiotic. This is many years ago. And this prebiotic fiber was not that we use now, wasn't at the time really being used as a prebiotic fiber. Now it's well shown to be one of the best prebiotic fibers. But, that stuck with me. And I was working on some other entrepreneurial things. And I started to get very severe acid reflux and GERD. And that kind of was one thing personally that spurred me to start thinking about how important the gut was again. I mean, it was debilitating. GERD and acid reflux, when it gets to that level, I mean, it really changes your entire routine and your life. And I would only sit down and eat a meal unless I had like a 32-ounce cup of water there, And so mostly had been in pretty good health most of my life. But I think I had a lot of stress at that time. And who knows what other things might have disrupted my gut microbiome at that point in time. So a few more years went by and we developed the Good Bru, a very simple organic formula that really supports the gut microbiome. And it just happened also that my business partner was also having some gut health issues similar to that. And our product really did a lot to help each of us. But we didn't design it specifically for that. We designed it for, overall gut health and gut health support, which it does a great job of doing that. But since then, we've had so many testimonials of people with those same similar issues tell us that it's been the only thing that's really helped them, permanently helped them, So if you think about like acid reflux and GERD, and those things, and also chronic constipation, IBS, and many of these other things, the medical system really just provides Band-Aids. So a lot of the things that we use to treat, say, acid reflux, for example, is just one thing, are like antacids and proton pump inhibitors that ultimately do not fix the problem, but even make the problem worse because we need acidity in our stomach to properly digest our food. And if we rely on proton pump inhibitors and antacids, we basically change the acidity in our stomach so our food doesn't get digested properly. And ultimately, it also allows for more pathogenic bacteria to survive. So it actually, over time, makes the problem more severe. So changing your gut microbiome and healing your gut with diet and exercise and probiotic and prebiotic will go a long ways to actually allowing you to live a healthy life. And it affects so many aspects of our biology, from our mental health. So many connections have been made to mental health, to overall immune health. And many people say that pretty much every disease in our body starts in the gut, going back to Hippocrates. But yes, it really affects so many different things. And I know you've got some questions for me, but that's kind of the high order bit part of it.
Yeah, I've talked to people that suffer from acid reflux and things like that, and they talk about how it's life changing, dealing with it all the time. So let me ask you this, Gabe. A lot of people think stress and burnout are purely mental. What does science actually say about the connection between the gut and the brain?
Oh, it's tremendous. And it works both ways. What's interesting is all of these things, the mind, body, spirit, they're all interconnected. It's not one or the other. So science really shows that the gut produces for example, it affects the endocrine system. So it produces or has a direct effect on the way the body produces many of the most important neurotransmitters in the body, hormones and other things. But a very direct connection is serotonin. So 90% of the serotonin produced in the body is produced in the gut. And our gut microbes can actually produce some of that serotonin. But the gut microbes, when we have a healthy gut, which is called homeostasis, they produce the precursors for our cells to be healthy, to produce proper amounts of serotonin, which then ultimately affect mental health. That's just one of dozens of things that you can draw connections between the gut and the brain. But that's a very, very important one, and it's a very direct one. And so when we get under stress, our bodies kind of shut down, certain mechanisms shut down, and stress under a short period of time, and the things that the body does under a short period of time is obviously part of survival. However, in our modern world, we get into these periods of stress that stretch on for much longer than stress should stretch on for. And so our body's constantly under these stress responses that will actually change the chemistry of the body, and then will also impact the way that we eat, the foods that we eat, and then that will also affect the microbiome, and the microbiome will then reciprocate and magnify those negative things so that we stay under stress. So it works both ways. But, I just was in my reading, and you correct me if I'm wrong, but I was reading that your message goes out to a lot of incarcerated people. And I think, one of the things that has been highlighted by RFK and the MAHA movement is how much food, diet, and the microbiome is being shown to affect people who are incarcerated under a stressful environment like that, and how a good diet and good microbiome actually very much can shift the way that people handle being in that environment, and in a much less big reduction in violence and that sort of thing. But also the gut microbiome is very much related as part of this whole stress response to addiction. So we know that the gut microbiome the microbes will produce what they want. So we have, bad microbes, we call it dysbiosis or despotic microbes, pathogenic microbes, and we have probiotics that we inherit from our mothers at birth, primarily, and everybody's gut is as unique as a thumbprint is, but we inherit these good microbes and we get these bad microbes, and through modern living and antibiotics and pesticides and preservatives and processed foods, we've altered our gut microbiome extensively in a negative way. And what we know is that these microbes, once the bad microbes take over, they make it very hard for the good microbes to proliferate and come back into balance and where they're supposed to be in the gut. And these microbes will actually produce the neurotransmitters or the chemical signaling to the brain that will then incentivize the brain to continue doing that thing or craving more of that thing. So there's microbes that thrive on sugar, and they'll produce a chemical signal for the body to crave more sugar, for example. But they're also related this back to other, like, more severe addictions, to drug addictions and alcohol and that sort of thing. And there's been a lot of studies now done that show that one of the things that is very important, is if you say you're an alcoholic and you recover from alcoholism, your gut microbiome will shift with that in a more positive direction. But also, it's been shown that if you have a healthy microbiome at the time you're trying to recover from alcoholism, the success rate of recovery will be much higher. So, it's this reciprocal thing, and it's how much of an impact it has on us. So, yes, I consider all of that stress, like anything abnormal coming into our environment, is stress. And it's not all mental, it's a very much a biological aspect to that. And there's also some studies, really tells the story too. So people with PTSD, they know that a healthier microbiome and things that we can do to establish better probiotics and a healthier microbiome will reduce the symptoms of PTSD, but also autism. And these are kind of severe cases. So it applies to us all. It's just that you can really see it in the severe cases. But with military veterans, they were studying this. And now, not only do they think that, they can help assist veterans with PTSD by altering and helping them have a healthier microbiome, but what they're now also showing, and this gets really a very good real world example of what you're asking, is that the cells in the intestines that produce serotonin, they also produce another hormone that's also produced in the brain, but it's produced in the gut, called corticotropin release factor. So it's a hormone that manages cortisol levels. And cortisol, under short-term stress has benefits, but over long terms, we're not supposed to be constantly under high amounts of cortisol. So these same cells that produce the serotonin also produce this cortisol regulating hormone. And they've seen that when the gut is in dysbiosis, not only are the cells producing less of the serotonin, but it's also producing more of this cortisol release factor. And so it's a double whammy. Not only are you getting less serotonin, but you're also getting higher levels of cortisol directly related to the gut. And what they were looking at with these veterans were, why did some veterans get PTSD and others didn't under the same situation? And they actually were linking this back to the condition of their gut and their gut microbiome at the time they experienced the trauma. So when they experienced the trauma, if you had a healthy gut and gut microbiome, you were more able to resist and process the trauma in a healthy way because you had the right kind of chemistry in the body from the gut microbiome. So, and this also gets into other very interesting things like the serotonin reuptake inhibitors. There's no real good evidence that they work on the brain directly, but what they do see is that they work on the gut, which is interesting. So, allowing more serotonin to stay in the gut, which they've also seen helps to change the gut microbiome. So, it's all in the gut. It's all in the gut. So there's another really important, very, very important thing that the gut microbiome does, and that's produce the short chain fatty acids in the lower intestine. And we only get about 5% of that from the food we eat. The body doesn't produce any of these short chain fatty acids, and about 95% of them are produced by the gut microbes themselves. And these short chain fatty acids are critical to providing the energy needs of not just in the digestive system, but also throughout the body. But this one very important one, butyrate, it provides the necessary energy source for the cells in the colon and through the intestines, which then allows the cells to work properly so that we prevent leaky gut. And leaky gut is when the cells that line the gut open up and they allow things out of the gut that are supposed to stay in the gut. And this creates an immune response and a cascade of things that changes mentally, physically, inflammation, et cetera, also related to dementia and mood. And anyhow, when a healthy microbiome, we produce butyrate, which helps maintain a healthy cell wall, which then keeps things in the gut that are supposed to stay in the gut, get them properly digested, and it avoids these immune responses. But in addition to that, now they've also showed that it affects the blood-brain barrier. So the same molecule that the microbiome produces to heal the gut also affects the blood-brain barrier. So when we have leaky gut, it's also likely that we have a leaky blood-brain barrier. And what they're seeing in a lot of autopsies and also with mice studies is that if you have a leaky gut, you have a leaky blood-brain barrier, and things are getting out of the intestines, causing inflammatory responses, but also bacteria is getting out, bad bacteria, and they can find it in fat tissue, but now they're also finding it in the brain, especially in the brains of people with dementia and that kind of thing. So a healthy gut doesn't just protect our guts. It protects everything in our body, including our brain. And it does a lot to help us better exercise performance. So exercise is important to the gut, but also a healthy gut is good for, getting more out of exercise. And because it's producing all these metabolites and vitamins, and B vitamins are actually not just absorbed from the food that we eat, but they're also produced as metabolites by the microbiome. And so there's just many things. You could go on and on and on. But yeah, and just our probiotic by itself that we use in Good Bru has been shown in and of itself to increase protein utilization by 20%. And that's the gut microbiome helping to break down these proteins into peptides and amino acids, because our body can't use whole proteins. They need to be broken down. So the microbes play a big role in that. And these amino acids and peptides aren't just for, muscle growth and that sort of, it's everything in our body runs off of peptides and amino acids, our immune system, our endocrine system, all of these things. And so what we did was we created a product that is real easy to use, and it's very basic for really, it does specific things, but it's really a product that can help support the rest of your gut microbiome. And because it's a spore forming probiotic, which we could talk about, I'm talking a lot and I need to let you ask some questions, but because it's a spore form, it survives the stomach, where a lot of off the shelf capsules types of probiotics, they don't survive well on the shelf and they die in the stomach because of the stomach acid. But Bacillus coagulans is a natural probiotic, a transitory probiotic that we get like digging up things out of the ground and that sort of thing. And it survives out in the open and it survives through the stomach. And you can also put it in your coffee, which makes it really unique. And so it's easy to use and get into your routine. And then it germinates in the lower intestine, where it helps support the rest of these really important gut microbes. But we also combine it with inulin fiber, which is now shown to be one of the best natural fibers for our gut microbiome to feed on. Microbiome's got to have something to feed on. And that's these fibers. But most of the fibers on the market produced by the big companies are not fibers that we would normally get in nature. They're wheat dextrins and corn dextrins and synthetic fibers, and they don't really feed the microbiome the way that inulin fiber does. Inulin fiber is the kind of fiber that we get from many things, like we get ours from agave plant, but like chicory root and other things have inulin as the primary fiber. So it's a fiber that the microbes have fed on and like to feed on. And now there's studies showing that very specifically inulin fiber does some really important things because it trains the microbes in the right way to break down sugars and et cetera. So yes, we have a product and because we use it by the scoop rather than a capsule, you could actually get a significant amount of the fiber. That's one of the problems with capsules is they can't put enough fiber in a capsule. So you can get probiotic, it may say it has prebiotic fiber in it, but there's not enough room in the capsule. By using ours as a scoop, you can adjust it to what works for you. We always tell people to start small with it, and then they can add more if they like more. We got people that get very specific with how much they like, so we base a serving on 2 scoops, but that's just for the nutritional panel. Many people just use 1 scoop a day, and that's fine. If that's what works for you. Start with 1 scoop and then see where you're at. We got some people that are telling me, well, 1.5 scoops, and that's what they stick with every day. So it's really easy to use and convenient, and it supports the rest of your gut microbiome. But yeah, it's, we're a small company. It's an entrepreneurial story. It's a story where we get lots of great testimonials. And the gut is a real deal. I mean, gut health is very important, but it's very, very pertinent to the world we live in today because we've done so much damage to our gut microbiome. And as I said, we inherit it from our mothers at birth. And so children that are born by C-section, for example, have a lot less diversity in their gut microbiome. It's just an example, but we all kind of do because we've lived in a world of several generations now that have had all of these different things that have disrupted our gut microbiome,
Yeah, I'll tell you, man, that's good because, people don't understand a lot of times how generational things, occur and what you have to do to kind of offset it and things like that. So, Gabe, for decades, people have been told to rely on medication for health issues, right? Why do you believe real healing often begins with lifestyle changes instead?
Yeah, well, there's let's just call it kind of like a commonsensical approach to thinking about that. Like what did our ancestors have? I mean, right? They didn't have modern medicine, but they had health issues, and they definitely didn't want to be sick. So they weren't just walking around sick. They were doing things to keep themselves healthy, and they knew a lot about health. And you can go back through the history of mankind and see, every civilization had people who were focused on medicine and keeping people healthy. So obviously, there's a very common sense approach to that, and also we know, like, just from our living, like, you feel better if you get out and you lose weight. You feel better if you go out and you exercise. It's very noticeable. You don't have to have a doctor tell you that you feel better when you're exercising or when you're losing weight or at the proper weight or getting the right amount of sleep. We know we feel bad if we don't get enough sleep on a regular. We're grumpy, we're this or that. You know how you feel if you eat sugar all the time, or if you get in the holidays, and you eat too much dessert, and it's fun when you're eating it, but it affects you. You don't feel well, and it causes everybody to start kind of bickering and everything like that, because they're not running on the right fuels. So, I mean, I think there's just all the commonsensical aspects of it, but now I think the research, the big pharma, the medical system really pushed back against a lot of these things and kind of made people even feel. They tried to, I think, in a lot of ways, even try to make people feel inferior to them, or to make them feel stupid for thinking there's other approaches and you got to take this pill or that pill. And now we know how much money is made and how much conflict of interest there is for a doctor to, sell a pill or a prescription versus telling somebody to take a different approach. I mean, they have a lot of financial conflict of interest, and it's been created by a system that allows, basically now, a financial entity, the insurance companies, which are banks, to make health decisions for you, right? Like they tell the doctors what they can do and what they can't do based on what they'll pay for and what they won't pay for. And now, so we just have so much research now coming showing that your gut microbiome is so important to your health. It's central, just like exercise is central, just like sleep is central. Your gut and your gut microbiome is central. It's not secondary, it's primary. And we can see, like, say, for example, now there's some very specific health issues. They're now starting to prescribe what's called fecal transplants, but also they've seen this in like more broadly, more research, a lot done with mice, but with people too, with humans, how much that can change very quickly conditions, like all kinds of conditions. It's a very interesting thing to research, but it doesn't take long. You just go on the web, go onto Google and look at results of fecal transplants. So, and it changes everything from behavior to physical elements to chronic disease, these types of things. So there's a lot of research that's now backing this stuff up with scientific clinical studies for your gut specifically, but then of course with exercise and diet. I mean, we reverse diabetes. We know that diabetes, just type 2 diabetes was almost non-existent, a couple of generations ago, and now it's just taken up. Why did that happen? It did happen because we have added so much sugar to our diet, but in addition to that, we've also damaged the gut microbiome. So we've done two things at the same time. We've really added a lot of fructose and sugars and things to everything that we eat, processed foods, not just the sugars, but also other things in the processed food. But we've also damaged the gut microbiome. So our bodies are less able to, manage these things that we're attacking our bodies with. So, you're going both ways. You're going more bad stuff, in your diet, and then less good microbes in your gut to manage it. And we know what leaky gut and all these things are, but we also know very well now that you can reverse the type 2 diabetes with diet, and there's researchers and doctors out there, practitioners that say they're reversing Alzheimer's disease using the same approaches, as well. So there's a little bit of genetics in all of these things, but it's much more like, cancer and those kinds of things. It's much more about what we're exposed to and how our bodies are functioning and how well our immune system's functioning. I mean, even with Alzheimer's, if they look at people that have both genes, like a double pair of the genes that make you most predisposed to Alzheimer's, when they look at places in the world where people live on a more healthy lifestyle, even with those genes, it's like maybe still like 10% of the people that have the highest risk factor for developing Alzheimer's, still only like 10% of them end up with Alzheimer's. So what's the other 90%? It's lifestyle, it's what they're eating, it's the exercise, it's all these sorts of things that are affecting that. So there's plenty of evidence all across the board. Our common sense, when you feel better, you don't need a doctor to tell you that exercise, that, you take charge of your own self because you know how you feel. You know what makes you feel better. These things. And so we've been kind of shamed almost by the medical community. Like, you got to come talk to this guy and do exactly what he's, it's a two-way street. And don't get me wrong, there's many, many doctors out there that do want to help people in this way, but they've been kind of pigeonholed, And somebody told me once, they was like, your best friend in holistic medicine is a retired doctor. Because once a doctor retires, they can say whatever they want to, and they've also seen a lifetime of things, and they kind of grow and start to develop their own way of thinking after medical school, after years and years of practice. But they can see they have pressure on them from insurance and pharma and these kinds of things, and liability, so it's weird. They can't be as held liable for a mistake if they're following some protocol from some insurance company or from some pharmaceutical company, even if they might be causing harm. Whereas if they try to do something helpful for you that's not in the protocol, now they're exposing themselves to more liability,
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. But you said one thing, a lot of times it's lifestyle, man. It's lifestyle. And personally what you need to do to help yourself be more healthier and things like that. So Gabe, let's go back to Good Bru.
Okay.
What was the biggest lesson you learned turning your healing experience into a business mission?
Biggest lesson I've learned, well, that has a little bit to do with who I'm speaking to, because I think there's so many things that you do learn. That's just not one thing. And you want to try and, tell a person what you think is most pertinent to them. But I will say this, you need to have a good product, and all of that kind of thing. And we have a good product. But a lot of it, if you're trying to be an entrepreneur, is staying in the game. Like you hear the old saying, you got to be in it to win it. There's a lot of truth in that little simple saying, but it doesn't tell the whole story. You got to make some decisions that are in balance with where you're at in your business. So sticking with it, you have a good product, you know it works. And you also you do need to be able to abandon ideas if they're bad ideas. So, but let's say you get to the point, you got a good product, take little steps so that you don't take too high of a risk for where you're at. So what's not a risk at all to a big company is a high risk to a small company because you don't have the capital to absorb something. So you get these big ideas in your head and you're like, I'm just going to shoot for the moon. But the risk of ruining your business that way is very high when you only have a little bit of capital to make you survive. So you want to survive. You want to stay in the game. And then as you get bigger, now what was once a huge risk is not a big risk at all. Let's say you want to try something that costs $10,000, a marketing thing. When you're a little company, that could ruin you. But then once you get going and you're 2 or 3 years down there, 10,000 is nothing. Like I could try it now, I can try this thing now and I can think it through. And then as you get even bigger, these big companies do Super Bowl commercials and things that, they're millions of dollars, but you can't do that from day one. You got to work your way up. So stay in the game, take little risk that you can afford. And then when you find one thing that works, it doesn't take a lot to prove something. If you've ever had statistics, you'll know that it doesn't take a very large sample size to prove something. Like if you see it working, see it work once, you see it work twice, 3, 4 times. All right, now go run with that one thing as far as you can run with it. Allow that to build your business and then try the next thing. Keep trying little things. Most of them won't work exactly as you think, or they won't work at all. Then you'll find the next one that'll work and, build that one and build this one. So you're staying in it. And this applies to a lot of things. And then you will hit. Baseball is a really good analogy because, you can't hit a grand slam unless you get 3 guys on base. You know what I mean? So he's like, yeah, it's not possible. So, don't try to hit a grand slam until you get some people on the bases, So that's a really good example. I think baseball actually is. Sports analogies are a little funny because it depends on you played sports or didn't play sports. But baseball is a good one because it's a lot of statistics and numbers. It's like, okay, right, you're going to have a batting average of this. Well, expect that to pretty much hold consistent throughout the whole season and don't try to do things that are spitting in the face of those averages, and that kind of thing. So stay in it, have a good idea, have faith. I know this program's a lot about faith. That's important. Faith's important. If you're doing something, don't underestimate those things, And gratitude, I learned when I was going through a lot of hard times, I really learned a lesson of gratitude. That's such an important mindset. You can change your whole day around, and it's to say I'm grateful to be here, whatever, anything. It just starts to change everything in your whole way of thinking, and you got to do it all. It's a practice, so you got to really practice that and being grateful. And I think one of the things I've learned about gratitude is that you have to be grateful for everything, and because once you're grateful for everything, you can start to see the purpose in it. You can connect the dots. And it's really easy to be grateful for a sale in business, for example, getting a sale. That's easy to be grateful for. But being grateful for the things that felt like they caused you a lot of pain, that is something that can stick in your throat to say, I'm grateful for this thing, because your mind's telling you shouldn't be grateful for that. Why are you grateful for that? But you wouldn't be you and you wouldn't be where you're at if that thing didn't happen to you in your life. And once you can say you're grateful for that, now you can start getting clarity. Because if you look at a human being, we're more defined by what we don't have than what we do have. We're more defined by what we're not than by what we are. Because, by definition, there's 8 billion people in the world and you're just you. So you're not what 8 billion other people are. You're what you are. And so just as much about what you say, say you're a musician, well, you define yourself as a musician, but you're also not a football player, a baseball player, a doctor. You know what I mean? You're not all. And Marcus Aurelius wrote in Meditations a lot about that. He was one of the good emperors of Rome or whatever. And he was surprising. This guy had everything, but he was very humble. And he actually wrote a lot about being grateful for things that he didn't have. So, he didn't have some sort of ability or something like that. Well, in that way of thinking, like I'm thankful that, let's take something real easy, like a softball idea. Like I'm really grateful that I'm not a famous actor, because if I was a famous actor, I wouldn't be an entrepreneur, or whatever, stuff like that. Yeah. And, obviously it's easy to also be grateful for things like it's when we see somebody that say has a lot of issues, of some sort, it's sometimes we walk away from that, and you always have that feeling of, man, my life's not that bad, because you just walked away. But don't take that for granted. That feeling that you have there can teach you that you can feel that way a lot more often if you think about it. Don't wait until you have to, meet that person who's dying some painful death or something, or experience. Take that with you, because gratitude will pull you a long ways. It'll just keep you going.
Absolutely. And one thing, I always say, be grateful of the lessons that life has taught you. Everything's not roses. Sometimes we fail at different things at different moments, but be grateful for the lesson.
Yeah.
So, Gabe, I have what I call quick fire questions. There's no right or wrong answer. All right.
Okay.
All right. What is one food everyone should add to their diet immediately?
Foods to add to your diet. I tell you, resistant starches are good to add. So one of the things with our modern diets is we got all these different things, but I would say like sweet potatoes and things like that. If you're from North Carolina, like I am, that's a pretty easy one, but they actually got a lot of benefits. In fact, I can mention some other ones, but also with baked potatoes, if you need to look this up, there's a special way to prepare like just regular baked potatoes that give you more resistant starch. You need to kind of like, most people aren't going to go through this process, but you make the potato and then I think you set it aside in the refrigerator, et cetera. But I think sweet potatoes pretty much already have the resistant starch there, so you don't have to go through a lot of steps. But we know that starches, that other animals that don't cook their food can't really eat these tubers and things from the ground. But because we cook our foods, we break them down into starches. And we know historically that has had a lot to do with the human microbiome, is these special resistant starches like that come from like sweet potatoes and things like that. So I think you will get benefits from that if you don't have those in your diet. There's other ones. I mean, there's lots of other ones. The polyphenols, anything with good polyphenols, you need to look that up. But there's quite a few berries and things like with blueberries. Here's an example with blueberries. Cultivated big juicy blueberries, they all look so pretty on the shelf. They actually aren't the ones that really have the strong polyphenols. This has been well studied. You need to look in the frozen section of like your grocery store and look for the ones that say wild blueberries. They're these little teeny ones. They're not the really nice ones that make big presentations, but they're loaded with polyphenols. And there's other ones too, but look for foods with polyphenols and those good foods with resistant starches. Don't get your starches from processed foods. Get your starches from sweet potatoes or those sorts of things.
Okay. So what's one morning habit that supports gut health?
What's that? A good habit that supports good gut health?
Yeah, in the morning.
Yeah, a morning habit. Well, actually, tea and coffee. And obviously, most people use like our product in the morning. I put 2 scoops and some people 1 scoop in their coffee every morning. So you're adding some fiber and some probiotic. But if you drink coffee or tea in the morning and the caffeine doesn't bother you, and don't put a lot of sugar and creamers and stuff in it. If you do use creamer, you want to try to use one of these newer kinds of these creamers that are based on what they call the medium chain triglycerides, like the MCT oils and those sorts of things. They make creamers with that. But there's a problem with dairy. Most of the dairy milk in the United States has a certain protein in it that we don't handle very well. There is another dairy, but it's mostly in Europe. So you got to be careful with dairy, but like it's blah, blah, blah. But yeah, in the morning, if you are a coffee drinker or a tea drinker, there's actually a lot of good data showing a reasonable amount is good for your gut. Yeah. That's a morning habit. The other ones would be like eating the blueberries, the polyphenols, or goat cheese. Goat cheese versus dairy cheeses has more of those MCT, the medium chain triglycerides that help with the ketones and that kind of thing. And it feeds the gut well. Avoid processed sugars. And even with your fruits, don't overdo the fruits. There's a lot of sugar in that. Everybody has a little different tolerance for that. But get polyphenols, MCT or goat cheese, as long as you tolerate caffeine, okay. Your coffee, particularly if it's black or green tea or just any tea, because it's got the polyphenols in it that help feed the gut microbiome. But they've shown that a lot. And so, and that's Good Bru. BRU, GOD, BRU, not BREW, but BRU. Yeah, we spell it with the BRU. So you can definitely do that in the morning.
Good deal. So what's one book or person or influence that shaped your wellness journey?
Oh, one book or person. Oh, man, I read so many, but so on my wellness journey, I will tell you for me, Wim Hof, there's been a lot. I mean, but I'm just going to throw Wim Hof out there as somebody for really getting mental focus together. I think a lot of people are carrying like the cold bath and things too far, to the point that it's scaring people away from the benefits of that. And women are more sensitive to it than men as well. So if anybody's not familiar with Wim Hof, he's got a breathing technique that's very powerful. The cold is what he's really kind of famous for, the cold baths and that kind of thing. And then, of course, just mental clarity, gratitude, and those sorts of things. So he combines them all together. But there's a lot of research also on saunas and heat, and how exposing ourselves to extremes, because we live in such a cozy world, whether it's saunas, a cold, both turn on a lot of mechanisms in the body that we normally have shut down, that have a lot of healing properties for the body. But when it comes to cold, all these people that are jumping in the frozen lakes and stuff like that, you don't have to do that. There's a lot of research that shows that even just splashing cold water on your face is really just very beneficial. And even anything at like 50 or 60 degree water temperature, even for like 30 seconds, is actually really good, because it turns these things on. So you don't have these people are getting scared by these extremes of, I got to go jump in, a frozen lake, No, there's so much research that just shows how much a little bit of exposing ourselves to one extreme or the other. And in fact, they've done some research I was reading recently with, like, I think it was only 30 seconds of cold exposure, like at 50 degree water, allow neuroplasticity that you can't achieve under normal conditions. So it allows the brain to kind of like open up and gives us a chance to kind of like help us process things in a way that we can. So Wim Hof was big. Now on gut health, I've read a couple of books recently, so they weren't really on my journey, but I would recommend a book called Gut. It's just called Gut, G-U-T. Sold many millions of copies. It's by a doctor named Julia Enders. She's German. The book's written in English. It's really easy reading, but it covers very deep topics. So it's just called Gut. So I read that book more recently, and it was written quite a few years ago, but it is a really good book for understanding the gut, how our gut works. So yeah, there's been lots of people that have influenced me, but I would have to give credit to Wim Hof for something that I practiced and now keep elements of what I learned from his stuff in my everyday routine.
Okay, so lastly, Gabe, how can listeners follow you on social media or reach out to you about Good Bru?
We're terrible on social media. We got to get better at that. But GOODBRU.com is our website. And we have a few different discount codes. But if you use Give Thanks, it's an easy one to remember. That'll get you 10% off. Give Thanks at GOODBRU.com, Give Thanks. And if you just email at info@goodbru.com, I'm the one that sees those, and I can respond to you, if you just email us at info@goodbru.com if you want to have any questions answered. And you can see us on our social media. I'm going to get better at social media. We'll start posting more things on our Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, particularly YouTube. We've got a lot of clips from these different shows. We'll start putting on YouTube.
So there you have it. Gabe Dough. Gabe, thank you so much, man, for taking the time out to come on the show. Very great insight, man. Very great insight. And I'm pretty sure the listeners will have learned something from this.
I appreciate it. Thank you. It was a pleasure to be on. And if you have any more questions for me, you can just ask me anytime, or I'll come back on if you want. If we get down the road a ways and think there's a reason for it, just let me know.
Absolutely. Thanks for listening to Real Talk Reginald D. If you enjoyed listening to Real Talk Reginald D, please rate and review on Apple Podcasts. See you next time.